Okay, thanks for being here. Let's stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Daly,
Here.
Vice President McNall,
Here.
Trustee Clements,
Here.
Trustee Headland,
Here.
and Trustee Valentine.
Here. Thank you. We'd like to start our meeting tonight with a moment of silence for Ginny Pidala. She is a Haldane graduate, a parent, a faculty member who passed away on September 24th, 2021. Thank you very much. The next Board of Education meeting will be on Tuesday, October 19th at 7 p.m. right here in the auditorium. And our workshop topic will be curriculum and human resources update by Mr. Elder. Also, we will be having an external audit report for the 2020-2021 to be presented by Bonadio Co, our external auditors, and that will be on October 19th if anybody would like to join us. I will turn it over to Dr. Benante for his update.
Thank you, Ms. Daly, and welcome to the members of the Board of Education and any member of our community who may be tuning in. I just have a few updates for this evening. The first, I'm pleased to announce that Luke Parrella will be our student representative to the Board of Education this year. So Luke will join us at our next meeting. I had an opportunity to meet with Luke and Mrs. Sniffen a couple of days ago, and I'm really encouraged by his interest in serving as a student representative to the board, and you will all have the opportunity to meet him in a couple of weeks. It's an exciting week on campus. It's homecoming week or spirit week, culminating in homecoming activities at the end of the week. Just wanted to thank Mr. Cowan and Mrs. Sniffen and for our student representatives who've taken a lot of time to put together a great week for students. And we look forward to the Athletic Hall of Fame induction ceremonies, which will occur partly on Friday night, but the actual brunch this year is on Saturday morning, and I look forward to meeting our Hall of Fame inductees. I just wanted to, I know we'll speak of this later, I wanted to thank our board and also the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District and Mr. Albano, their superintendent, for their time in coordinating our joint retreat. They were gracious hosts, and I know we'll have a little bit of discussion about the topics that were discussed then later on in this evening's agenda. And also our Haldane School Foundation hosted a wonderful event this past weekend in a very safe manner at the Taconic Outdoor Education Center. And everyone was having a wonderful time. And I look forward to hearing the results of that in some time here. But they had a great event, and it was great to see so many of our community members out enjoying some time together. And then just a few COVID updates. I wanted to mention that we do have our new nurse, Ms. La Pidala, who has started with us towards the end of last week. She will be facilitating the mandatory staff COVID testing protocols that we have in place, and that will begin this week. She'll also be facilitating the student testing that we'll be doing, and then we expect that to occur in a week or two as we sort out the details with the staff testing. So Ms. La Pidala joined us last week. We expect her to be with us anywhere between 3 and 4 days per week, and we're sharing her service with Garrison. And just a reminder to the board and anybody who may be watching, the funding for Ms. La Pidala's position came through federal stimulus dollars, but it's being coordinated through the Putnam County Department of Health. So it's not part of our federal stimulus fund use plan. It's part of the counties, and we're glad that she's able to help out. Obviously, that takes some of the pressure off our nurses. And Jen, that concludes my remarks for this evening.
Okay, great. Is there any communication from the public? All right. Moving into our information reports. They are here for anybody's review. Consent agenda minutes. May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
These are the minutes from our September 14th and September 21st meetings. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Oh.
Heavens.
Sorry,
Yes.
Peggy.
Laid plans.
That's like, I didn't mean to face plant you. That was the most exciting thing, hopefully, that's going to happen at this board meeting.
I'm good.
Okay. It might happen again. Okay. Sorry, did we all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Consent agenda, financial. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? I'll just make mention for the public that there is an item on here to establish the Ginny Pidala Annual Scholarship Award to be given out to Haldane students, which is usually done at the end of the year during graduation. All those in favor?
Hold on, I just have a quick question, and I apologize for asking sort of off the cuff. I was looking, one of the items is the BOCES, approval of the BOCES budget, and there are just a couple things from a staff, it seems like a staffing that I just didn't recognize. I was wondering if you or Ann can provide a
Yeah,
little
if Ann
insight.
can
as
come up to the
as
microphone,
to
and
what those are.
John, can you just?
Yeah, sure.
You're going to point us to something specifically?
I was just looking at it, and what is Learning Center Fox Meadow?
That's
Do you-
a placement.
It's a placement? It's an
Yes.
extra, okay, extra placement. And is that, is similar, the LSB program?
That's correct.
Also a placement? Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate it. I just noticed that those are a large sums, so wanted to understand what they are. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Consent agenda personnel, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? You may notice that our very own Miss Maggie Valentine is on the approval list. That has been cleared with council, that there is no conflict of interest for Maggie to donate more of her time to Haldane in a volunteer capacity. So we thank Maggie.
Well, thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, so we just have a few items on our unfinished business list here. So first is the public comment format. So a couple meetings ago, I made mention of the possibility of just being a little bit more specific in our public comment section. We currently have 2 public comment sections, and both are currently kind of catch-alls. And we talked about perhaps making it more specific so that the first one is for any items that the board is going to vote on later in the meeting, or any comments on the special presentation that was just given. And that the second one would be the catch-all. So if somebody had a comment that was off topic or off meeting topic, or wanted to comment on a special presentation or something on the agenda, they could. So I threw it out to you guys a couple meetings ago. I don't know if anyone had any follow-up on that or thoughts, or if you want to give it a try. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that makes sense.
Does
Give
to
a
me,
little more
too.
direction. I think the other thing that you had mentioned last time, which I think is important, is that following the second, and actually frankly at the end of the entire meeting, you have, even though there's no dialogue during the course of public comment, there is the opportunity for the superintendent reflection, which can be a space for Dr. Benante, who, the superintendent, and John, to sort of respond
Yeah.
to anything that may or not necessarily required, but if there are things that would require that, for which he has an immediate response, that could serve.
Yes, absolutely.
But in general, I think the proposal is a good one.
Yeah, are you guys game to give it a try? We'll see how it works. If we don't like it, we can change it back.
Sounds great.
Okay, so we'll give that a try. Peggy, did you have any thoughts? How's it sound to you?
I think it sounds like a good idea.
Okay, cool. Okay, the second topic is the parent representation on district committees. So I followed up with you guys last week to let you know that the PTA president was interested in having a conversation. Phil and I had a conversation with the PTA president, Laura O'Connell, and so some interesting things I think came out of that conversation, things that I wasn't anticipating. But what was interesting, and I hope, Phil, you'll chime in here, what was interesting to me was the PTA was both really interested in having a representative on the board committee as a PTA person. And because they're there representing the PTA, right? The PTA selects them, they're there representing the PTA. They then, in fact, need to be a PTA member because they're there representing the PTA. And so then Phil and I were like, well, maybe they don't have to represent the PTA. Maybe they could just be a parent.
Right.
But then Laura said, well, but we actually want them to represent the PTA because we have committees that are aligned as well. And it's actually really, really helpful and important to have our committees knowing what's going on the committees, like the technology and the wellness and the buildings and grounds. It's really helpful for the PTA committees. So we then were talking about, well, maybe there's two things then. Maybe there's a PTA rep selected by the PTA, and then maybe there's a parent selected by the administration that's not could be a member of the PTA, but that's not a requirement. It's more of a, we were throwing around the term parent at large, like just a freestanding parent who wanted to be involved. So that was kind of came out of the meeting as a possible solve to, I think, keeping both the PTA feeling represented and connected and not taking anything away from what they've been doing, but meeting the concern of the board of wanting to make sure that that parent representative is a free agent. And could it be representative of any part of the district? Because also what we learned was there's only approximately 40 PTA parent members,
Oh, really?
Really?
which that was surprising to both Phil and I. But that's the membership that they're dealing with, which is a separate issue,
Yeah.
right? We need to talk about, they need to work on that. That's something that is a concern, that we just don't have that many parents involved with the PTA. So that's a separate issue, but it is telling that that's the pool of people that they're pulling from for these representatives. Did I miss anything?
I think you provided a pretty comprehensive summary there, Jen.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add is that if we were to entertain any changes, these would be for next year and would be facilitated, well, depending on what the board resolves to, we would want, the administration would want to begin to engage in a process of soliciting interested members from the PTA, from parents at large. We also have internal members of our associations that are included on these committees. We would want to begin that process approximately April, mid-April, May, somewhere around there, just to give time to go through a review of anybody who may be interested.
And then the committees could really be in place to get going in the fall instead of waiting to the fall to find somebody.
Just a quick question on that. So sounds like it makes sense. The way the committee membership is currently written, I was trying to look for one, I couldn't find one. I seem to remember that it's a parent selected by the PTA, rather than a PTA representative, a parent at large. Will that need to change in the charges for the committees for
Yeah, I
next
think
year?
we'll need to change the language so that it's more specific, that, you know, currently I believe it says something about, 2 HFA reps and 2 DOE reps. It would need to say 1 PTA rep or 2 PTA reps, whatever we decide, and then 1 parent rep, and they would be 2 separate kind of line items. Go ahead, Peggy.
So, I guess, at the risk of going out there, I'm not sure I understand the PTA representative on the committees. Especially right now, the PTA represents a really, honestly, quite small portion of our parents. And I just took a really quick look at their mission. And while I think their mission's kind of aligned, like, there's two things that I have questions about. And so one is, like, is that really the role of the PTA to have its own representation on a committee? And if so, I guess I need more time to think about why the PTA should be represented when other parent organizations aren't. And I think there likely is a rationale to be made for the PTA to be represented. I just haven't had time to process that yet. And I guess the other question I have is, right now I'm not convinced that their committees do align with our committees, because if you look at their webpage, there's 3 committees: equity, diversity and inclusion, garden, and learning differences. And those are like super important committees. I'm really glad they exist. But I'm not sure. I'm still, again, I'll take responsibility for this, but I haven't had the opportunity to think through and understand the rationale that they need representation on the district committees. Now, if this is something that Phil really wants and the administrators really want, they think it's a really good idea, then I can be easily convinced. I'm just not convinced in this particular moment.
Yeah, Peggy, I think that's fair. And I don't know that that's, their website is representative of all of their committees currently. I don't know that that's completely current. But I do believe it was, Laura mentioned, like it's interesting for the DEI committee to have a representative, for example, on the Code of Conduct Committee. It's interesting for the Garden Committee to have a representative on the Buildings and Grounds Committee. So it's not that they align exactly, but they do align in area of interest, I'll say. And because their committees do service the school, I think that they find it helpful to know what the school committees are up to and to contribute, and it helps them guide their committee work so that it's not separate, right? And we've talked about that before, that it's just concerning if a committee is rogue. We want committees to be aligned to the district's goals and missions, and this, by having them connected to the district committees, I think that it helps in that area.
Committee meetings,
That makes a lot of sense to me, and I mean, I think also the possibility of, like, if it's a joint goal of the PTA and the district to have a PTA that's got a larger membership, that is more representative, and that is like a thriving, vital organization, like linking them up with these committees, you know, certainly makes sense.
Yeah.
Certainly can make sense to me. Again, my point is just like, I'm needing a little bit of time to think,
Sure. Yeah, and like Phil said, this would be something for next year, so we could bring this up in our policy, and the policy committee can create policy around it, bring it to the board for.
Oh, okay, I missed that part, and I apologize. The idea was for it to be for next year.
Yeah. So, we have time to dance with it a little bit. Yeah.
The only thing,
Something we have to decide tonight, so
Exactly. Yeah. Take a breath. It's Mental Health Awareness Week, Peggy, so I just want you to take a breath,
take a
de-stress,
breath. That's good.
don't get anxious. Go
Was
ahead, John, what
that
were you gonna
a
say?
subject of conversation?
for some reason, I needed to decide this for now. I
No,
apologize for that.
thank you. No, thank you.
I was just going to ask and remind myself, committee meetings are open to the public, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so guaranteed representation is not necessarily a requirement for information sharing and knowledge of what's going on.
That's right.
Correct.
Okay,
And there are minutes
and there
As
are
well,
minutes, it's true.
that are available.
Yeah,
So I think Peggy's point about should other parent organizations or private the PTA is a parent organization, but they're a private organization. They're not a district. They're connected to the district, of course, but, so similarly, the HSF, the Arts Alliance, the booster clubs, would we want to open the district committees up to them as well?
Good point.
So I think it's a good conversation to have.
I mean, in the past 2 years, I've observed that a lot of the individuals that we're speaking about are involved in all of these organizations. So there's so much crossover that
Yeah.
the PTA is in fact represented because that person also is in one way or another in the,
Right.
overseeing the garden, for instance. So I feel like having a procedure in place for the time in the future when that is not the case, I think would be useful and helpful, I think, for everyone. So.
I think it sounds good.
Yeah.
I like the brainstorming as we get closer to coming up with a policy.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like we're moving in an agreed-upon direction, and we'll continue to get there as we get there. Okay. The last topic was reflections on our board retreat. So I just wanted to open this up to everybody here and just hear if you guys had anything you wanted to share, either about the process or about the actual facilitation or about the topics, or did it make you, percolate in other directions, or, just share.
All right, everyone's looking at me, so I'll go first.
You took a breath in.
All right. Yeah, that's okay. I thought the content was really interesting. I think it's always good to be either reminded or exposed to content that you sort of may dip in and out of, but to have a concerted effort to sort of pay attention to it and think about it and how it impacts yourself, impacts the work that we do, and impacts the school. I thought it was really useful. I thought it was really full of a lot of different pieces, which was in one way great and sort of served as a overview of a lot of things. What I found I would have liked more would have been, okay, now how do you put that into practice? Yeah. And what does that look like? And what do you do with it? And I actually asked a question, I think her name was April, is that right? Of where have you seen this work really well and what has been the outcome? And I think that's hard, frankly, it's sort of an unfair question because I think it's kind of hard to do. But that was the, okay, now what kind of question. But I thought it was really useful just as an initial, for me, an initial starting point to, okay, this is something we should be thinking about. What do we need to do? How should we think about it? What should we do about it? And what are we expecting to come from it? Is kind of.
Yeah, I would agree that the, in reviewing the agenda for the retreat versus how far we got into that agenda, I think the idea was we would be having a little bit more breakout discussion and getting to a place where maybe some of that action planning, visioning might have occurred, and we didn't get to that place. But I will say that, my takeaway from it, it's always useful when we're in these, these groups, and when we're coming together to have a shared vocabulary around which to understand what we mean when we say X is very important, I think, because there's I use the word disambiguation, and Phil has often commented on the use of that word, but I will use it again, that there is a lot of disambiguation that needs to go on as we think about what equity means when we use the word equity versus equality. And I think for our two sister districts to share those is really useful and important too, and I really appreciated having that opportunity. I think what was highlighted for me was, hearing and sort of having observed what GUFS has done with instituting a district policy, the efficacy of that, sort of following what NISBA had suggested last year, and, what the impact of that actually is and what that means. And another takeaway was, Jen and I, in one of the breakout groups, we had the opportunity to look at how we have focused on EDI in a rubric and sort of do a self-eval, and it was very difficult for us to say that we had made it a priority at all. So that which I think was a fair assessment, that, in that category of, though it is something of great concern to us, I feel like we said, well, we've had so much that we have been thinking about just getting the school together that it's been hard to center that conversation in the district. And we happen to be in a district in which we don't have a lot of parents or community members who are forcing the question, So it's incumbent upon us to center it if that is something that we feel as a district we need to do, So that was also nice to get clarity with and to have shared that with you, and that way I think was key as well. And so I leave it not knowing exactly how to take the conversation as a board forward in a meaningful way and what that might mean, but feeling like I kind of understand, or should it come up, I would know how we would share terms to have a constructive conversation about moving forward, so.
Right. Maggie, I know you had a brief experience because you had softball to get to, but.
Yes, I was there for about an hour and a half, but I would just sort of echo what Sean said earlier about, it was interesting for me to meet the Garrison School Board for the first time, but to also sort of hear that they've been working on this for sort of a while. It seems like they've had a couple more sessions, and it's interesting because those kids, obviously, that go there, we see them in other areas, right, in sports and after-school activities. So, hearing the experiences of the school and some of the kids that revolve around those topics, I don't know, it's just interesting, to hear what they're doing and to extend it out to sort of maybe what we would be doing. If those kids are having those experiences theirs, it sort of helps us as we, work with those kids in extracurricular. So I look forward to sort of working on it more and finding out how to narrow it down and make it more than just a checkbox, as we sort of said, so.
I wanted to add one other thing about, I've now observed this every time we've been together, is what the effect of having a larger board actually is on the conversation. Not that I would expect us to want to expand it, but if you have, 3 extra members on your board, the quality of the conversation of what there is in fact space for with the board changes dramatically in a way, so that they're just more active voices juggling different topics in one way or another. That just became clear to me when I saw the sheer, density of board members that were present when we came in. I was like, wow, it's a large group you have here, so.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that is decided. That is a district by district thing. It's not based on population or just the district makes a call, and then generally it sticks with that call, I don't know, in perpetuity.
Right.
But it's not to say it couldn't be changed if it wanted to. It's just a district decision. Peggy, did you have anything you wanted to share? Any reflections?
Well, I don't know how well people can hear me, but I will admit I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing folks talk, so I don't, so I'm a little bit concerned that I'm going to repeat some things that other people have said, but I'm going to take a stab at it anyway. And I thought the retreat was a really good high-level introduction to a variety of different, I don't want to say, constructs is the word I want to use, but that's too social sciencey, but different concepts, tools, ideas, and a little bit about their history, which I found really very useful. I mean, in terms of next steps, I don't know if it's something we would want to talk about at a retreat. I don't know if it's something that we want to wait and hear from the administrative team where they believe it would be most beneficial and most in alignment with a strategic coherent plan, in terms of where to focus, right, across across some of these different approaches. Maybe that's the best word. But I really appreciated the opportunity to meet the Garrison Board. I didn't get to go to the retreat we had with them last year. I'm really glad we're doing that with them. I think it's just really a great opportunity for us to get to know them, and even in this pretty minor way. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's so great to work with them in this way. I think it's really effective. And I was sharing, I was on a Westchester Putnam School Boards Association call, and we have, after our meeting, we have this like reflection time where people share things that's going on. And I shared how we just had this retreat with another school board, and it was the first time anybody had heard of it happening. You know, it was like, they were all floored that that was happening. And yet they were all really excited and impressed by it and inspired by it. So I think it's not something that happens that often. I think we all do tend to kind of live in our silos. So I'm grateful that we've started that tradition. I think it's been important. Something I was thinking about, and it was kind of, so Sean and I were in this group where we were saying, gosh, you know, we really haven't made this a priority. And then, you know, in thinking about that, it was like, well, why not? And then I was really focusing on this idea that like diversity and equity and inclusion so often centers around race, and we don't have a lot of racial diversity. So it's been, I think, pushed a little bit to the side for that reason as like not a big important issue. And yet, I started just really thinking about how actually we are a very diverse school if you take race out of it. I mean, we're half male, half female. And to think that there's not a whole bunch of gender bias is completely naive. And we certainly have plenty of different students who learn differently and who have special needs. So I started really thinking in my head about trying to reframe diversity as not just about race. But really about all those other items under the list, right? That it's like race, gender, sexuality, you know, learning style, et cetera, and yet somehow I feel like in my brain, I've always focused on race. And even, you know, sexual preferences and identity. So anyways, I just started reframing it for myself and thinking, actually, we are a very diverse school. And if we were to focus on teaching and making it a priority to teach and focus on diversity in the areas that are authentic to us, I would imagine it would trickle into other areas so that it didn't feel, because I've been struggling with this idea that it feels forced. Mm-hmm. It feels forced, you know, to talk about or to invite different conversations sometimes about race when that's not something that we see so clearly, and so it feels a little bit not authentic. So anyways, I've started thinking that if we were to reframe it a bit and think about diversity as more than just race, that perhaps we would still get to the same place, but in a more seemingly authentic way.
I really agree with that, and I think that was something that I didn't have a chance to bring up at the retreat, but I thought was really interesting in that the state memoranda policy, I don't know what it was, very explicitly spoke of diversity as a big, long list, many of which you have named, of gender, learning styles, religion, class, et cetera, and race. But a lot of the context that was in the rest of the policy, like the sort of the catalyst for this coming about, and all of the data being sourced, was basically solely race-based. I was like, it's really interesting that you're expressing a policy and a need that is really holistic, but yet a lot of it's being couched in sort of only one of those terms. Yeah. And that wasn't, for me, a realization that we talk a lot about learning differences, we talk a lot about teaching the whole child, we talk a lot about language differences, and those are authentic to us. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about, you know, wanting diversity in staffing, and really we've been talking about that in terms of race, but what if we talked about it in terms of all of the diversity, right? Like, wouldn't it be great to have more male teachers? Wouldn't it be great to, you know, have teachers that have disabilities? So anyways, I've just been starting to try to think of diversity a little bit more broadly, including race, of course. I'm not excluding it, but, you know.
I appreciate, I appreciate your also echoing something that we shared in the meeting, and I wanted to say also that, I mean, how we develop the curriculum in one way or another is sort of the real way in which that responsibility is communicated. So I do feel like the ways in which we investigate whose experience we are centering is when it comes down to equity is where it really reaches into many different lived experiences of one kind or another, be that cultural that's related to race, or it's cultural related to individuals with disabilities, LGBTQ plus issues. And I do feel like one of the challenges in a somewhat homogenous community is that those individuals who are in our community who don't identify as, white and male, are, tend to, or can fall or feel invisible or feel erased. And it's our special responsibility to include and to speak to their experience and to make sure that whatever unintentional power structures in place are just named, and that, we invite an open conversation about what that means in one way or another. But I agree with you about the equity issue, and I feel like there are terms in which we can all come together and see equity as our true goal, is how do we make sure that everyone has equal footing in the work that we're doing here and educating citizens, so that they see the connections in the ways in which they do or don't have power, because ultimately that's what it's about. Like, how do I feel empowered? How do I feel like I have a voice? And what are those things that make me feel like I don't, So, and I appreciate your entering that into the discussion today.
So I don't know what happens next. I mean, Phil and I have talked about it a little bit. I think Peggy is on to something. It might be a good retreat item for us to talk about where it goes next, how we'd like to proceed. And I'm sure, Dr. Benante has some ideas of how to help that along as well.
I would just start with recommending that we do spend some more time in retreat at some point this year with just Haldane. Loved being with Garrison, but I do think that it's important to consider our context and center that in addition to other things that have been brought up this evening. And as I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up with the board, because I know you've all seen this in some way, just how charged a topic this has become in so many surrounding communities. And I was really encouraged by our conversation, the Garrison Board's conversation, because I do think it's become something that is conflated, among other things, with things that it's not, or not certainly intended to be, and it's become more a matter of disruption to communities, and it really shouldn't be. It should be something that brings us together as a community. So sitting with that as part of the administration is really important for me, because whatever work we embark on, we want to see it have fair opportunity to succeed. So I think a retreat would be a good starting point, perhaps mid-year, with ourselves. And if we want to have a facilitator, someone like April, I'm sure we can coordinate that. If we want to just sit with the conversation ourselves, I think there's plenty.
Okay, so it sounds like more to come, maybe for a second retreat. Okay, going into the CSE, CPSE recommendations. Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendation of the Committee on Preschool Special Education and Committee on Special Education as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, any communication from the public at this time? Yes, Ms. Farrell, come on down.
Good evening. I didn't sign in, but it's good to see everyone in person. I think for the first time for me anyway. I've read the board's meetings, and I just wanted to thank you all, and especially Dr. Benante and the school administration, all the principals and staff, for guiding us, our community, and our students through these difficult times over the past 18 or so months. It's hard to believe there's a third year of dealing with COVID-19, but I think you've done a remarkable job, so thank you for that. And I also wanted to invite you to meet our Climate Smart Task Force Coordinator, Crystal Ford, who's relatively new, and has presented to the Garrison School Board on climate smart practices. As you know, Phillipstown is one of the leading climate smart towns in New York State, and we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint here. And I think that, Haldane is a district that does use lawn practices and all kinds of vehicles might benefit from Crystal's presentation, and I know she would be willing to give it sometime in the next year. If you would like us to facilitate that, we can have Crystal come and meet with the board or do a workshop, however you would like to do that.
Great.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any board reflections to share?
I have one reflection. I'd like to congratulate Luke on his selection or election or designation. And I would like to encourage us as we print out any sort of public-facing communication that lists the board members to include his name as well. Because he does take on this responsibility. I think it's important when we list, like in play documents or whatever. It's always nice.
Understood.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, nice idea. Okay, Dr. Benante, do you have any final thoughts?
No further thoughts. Thank you, Jen.
Okay, then I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Peggy.